Hey there, so it's 2014, and thanks to new media concepts, the internet, and ever-growing democratic societies, Africa is developing. But in some parts, information and growth are still stalled, and many journalists and media professionals have to risk their lives to share what's going on in their country. Which is why this week I'm looking at the top 10 countries in Africa where freedom of the press is not happening. If you don't know, check out this quick clip about World Press Freedom Day. We really risk our lives out there. All right, let's get to the countdown. Number 10 is the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, it's like deja vu, right? I just spoke about the Congo's attempted coup last week. All right, the DRC is ranked 142 out of 179 countries on the Reporters Without Borders 2013 Press Freedom Index, with 179 being the worst. The DRC's constitution provides for freedom of speech and all of that, but whatever. Several reports of harassment and arrest of journalists have surfaced, with the DRC government to blame. In 2013, journalists with Kisangani News were arrested for being critical of a deputy. A newspaper publisher spent 9 days in jail after connecting a youth minister to corruption. Also, last year, the government went crazy in shutting down media houses. Several radio stations were seized up and closed down, some without any reason. The good news is that the government does not restrict access to the internet or monitor its content. And there are 2 journalist rights organizations fighting for fair treatment of journalists in the country. Now, here's a clip explaining just how difficult it is to practice journalism in the DRC.
Congolese journalists work in a climate of fear. On top of that, many are not paid properly, if at all. If a story doesn't result in an envelope of cash from a politician, it may not be broadcast or published, and the journalist may not be paid.
Floribert Chebeya inhumé avec les honneurs aujourd'hui à Kinshasa, des funérailles en présence de tout le corps diplomatique européen, dont l'ambassadeur de Belgique. Près d'1 millier de personnes sont venues rendre hommage aux militants congolais des droits de l'homme.
In June, the country's most prominent human rights activist, Floribert Chebeya, was killed.
Indeed, it's not an easy place to be a journalist. Okay, on to number 9. It's the Gambia. Are you surprised? Not really, right? I know. All right, the country ranks 152 out of 179. In the Gambia, the constitution provides for freedom of speech and press, but the government of President Jammeh dares to respect it. In the Gambia, journalists are forever being harassed, arrested, and yes, some mysteriously disappeared. The murder of Data Hadara, a press freedom advocate, to this day still has not been resolved. 17 journalists, out of fear for their lives, have fled the Gambia in the past decade, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. And the number of disappearances and exiles just keep rising. Now, even journalists abroad are being affected. The government has blocked access to U.S. online publications like Freedom and the Gambia Echo. Not too long ago also, journalist Fatou Camara came on our show and gave us all the juice. She was once President Jammeh's press secretary. Here's a clip of Gambian President Yahya Jammeh speaking out against press freedom in the country.
Gambia is is one of the smallest countries in Africa, but it has a big reputation for media censorship, and its newly re-elected president is taking no chances, using his victory to make foul threats to the Gambian press.
Somebody said that this country is a hell for journalists. Well, then there are freedoms and there are responsibilities. The journalists are less than 1% of the population. And if anybody expects me to allow less than 1% of the population to destroy 99% of the population, you are in the wrong place.
Journalism is a risky business in Gambia. In 2006, a reporter detained by police disappeared. 2 years before that, a correspondent for Agence France Presse was killed in the street. Gambians who want to stay informed of events are forced to rely on state radio and heavily censored newspapers.
They are seen as people who denigrate the regime, who denigrate the country, and they are exposed to all kinds of repression, such as arrests, torture, secret detention and imprisonment, sometimes even murder.
Gambian journalist Musa Sharif has set up a new paper called The Voice. His previous newspaper, The Independent, was shut down by the government. All the newspaper's staff were arrested and detained for 3 days.
When you are arrested, you should be informed of what you are doing within 73 hours. But I went beyond 73 hours. You know, in our torture, before I was even informed, I've been beaten, I've been, assaulted. There's no torture that I didn't go through really. Attack the government.
Musa was later charged with collaborating with foreign media, such as websites edited from Britain and the United States. But some journalists are finding ways to promote press freedom without risking their lives. 3 Gambian journalists have set up an online radio station just over the border in Senegal, where journalists aren't subjected to such repression.
Respect for the journalists in the Gambia. All right, let's move on. Number 8 is Swaziland, ranking at 155. Another one that I'm not really surprised about, are you? All right, in Swaziland, there is no such thing as freedom of the press. Under Swaziland's absolute monarchy, King Mswati III has total power to do whatever he wants to the press and in the government. None of the proposed media bills have been enacted, leaving room for heavy media restrictions. In 2012, the king even checked happenings on the internet by proposing a law that would ban criticism of him on social media sites. Now, Swaziland has only 2 newspapers, and although reporting negatively on political issues in the royal family is a no-no, the papers seem to still push boundaries and criticize the government. So, today in Swaziland, because of the strains of being a journalist in the country, the profession is sort of becoming obsolete, with many media professionals leaving the gig for government jobs. And this is just not good for a place like Swaziland, where majority of the citizens live on about $2 a day. Here's a clip of an anti-monarchy protest from 2011 in Swaziland.
It's not a revolution yet, but in Swaziland, scenes like this were once unheard of. Filmed by hidden camera, these street protests began in April and now happen several times a week. Swaziland is Africa's last absolute monarchy, but the nation has fallen into a major economic crisis. Protest leaders blame King Mswati III and openly call for regime change.
We are shaking the tree such that the dangerous baboon is about to fall.
This is Mswati filmed at the most recent Reed dance, where 30,000 young women parade and dance for him. He also gets to choose a new wife. He already has 13. Despite a personal fortune estimated at $100 million, his kingdom's finances are so grim that Swaziland's only hope is a loan from its bigger neighbour, South Africa. Critics say it's a gift that will get little in return.
Swaziland. All right, Egypt makes the number 7th African country with little press freedom. The country is seeing its worst media repression ever. And to think, Egypt's press was once highly respected throughout the Arab world. However, today, the country's press is extremely biased. Because of the current power struggles between the Morsi-backed Muslim Brotherhood and the government-controlled military, intimidation, harassment, arrest, and severe restriction of journalists has reached its peak. It's really serious now around Egypt. In 2013, 17 journalists were killed, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. The CPJ also ranked Egypt as one of the deadliest places in the world to be a journalist. Even right now, as I speak, 4 Al Jazeera journalists are in custody for allegedly secretly meeting with members of the now-banned Muslim Brotherhood. Here's a clip describing the many assaults and arrests of journalists in Egypt.
This video, which cannot be independently verified, appears to show French journalist Caroline Sins being attacked by a crowd in Egypt. A French news agency is reporting that Sins and her cameraman were set upon while covering protests near Cairo's Tahrir Square. The attack comes shortly after an American-Egyptian journalist was detained, beaten and sexually assaulted by Egyptian police. Mona Al-Taweh had also been covering the Tahrir Square protests. She tweeted that she had been beaten and arrested in the Interior Ministry, and that she had been blindfolded and sexually assaulted. She later posted this picture showing both her arms in casts. Earlier in the year, during the Egyptian Revolution, many journalists, including the American TV reporter Lara Logan, were attacked while covering events near Cairo's main square.
This is about freedom.
The protesters in Egypt are demanding an end to military rule.
Gosh, Egypt. All right, let's move on to number 6. It's Rwanda. This East African country ranks 161 out of 179 on the Press Freedom Index. Now, that's pretty low. Journalists, human rights defenders, political opponents, and even everyday citizens cannot criticize the Rwanda authorities, or they could be risking their lives. 17 journalists have been killed since 1992, and 3 were in prison in 2012. Now, can you imagine, after experiencing genocide where nearly 1 million people were killed, the country is still stagnant, and its efforts to promote democracy are still stagnant. Many are blaming this repression of freedom of speech on the balancing of the genocide ideology law, which is in place to clamp down on views that could fan ethnic hatred. So, because of the strict, rather vague media environment, several journalists are being subjected to being targeted. Many give up and simply flee the country, leaving a scarred Rwanda with no critical voices. Here's a BBC interview with Rwanda's president, Paul Kagame.
In this country where we are sitting, you read everyday newspapers talking about different things, about politicians, about business people, about things. Do you go and turn around and say this country is in a mess because of these individuals?
But what do you say to these individuals? Because I mean, one of them
I'm saying this to you because the analysis seems to be based on wrong issues altogether. There is not a single country in this world. It's what I'm putting to you. There is not a single leader. There is not a single individual who is in public office that has not come under attack or criticism of one kind of... Wait a minute.
Sure, that's a valid point.
But yes, but the way you choose to say, well, I believe this one, I don't know...
No, I wasn't. I was putting it to you and I was asking your response. But General Nyamawasa...
I've answered these things hundreds of times.
But it's worth doing it again now because the focus is very much on Rwanda. General Nyamawasa says he was shot in Johannesburg.
For us in Rwanda, we are comfortable with what we are doing and what we have in terms of progress.
So these are just a few people who are critical of your leadership, no way indicative.
The facts are there for you to see. It depends on what you want to believe. You either go and believe what Nyamwasa is saying, and you don't want to see his own lack of accountability and issues relating to his own misconduct, and you don't want this again.
I wasn't, but I will say.
Right. All right, let's move on. Number 5 is Equatorial Guinea. It's ranked 166, right? Another shocker? Not really, no, yes. Okay, I don't even know where to begin with this country. There are so many hurdles holding back free speech and development there. So check this out. The Constitution guarantees media freedom. However, a law is in place for government censorship. Now, what a major contradiction, right? Any sort of protest or movement is heavily restricted, and political gatherings must first be approved by the government to convene. Journalists and human rights activists are repeatedly detained and harassed. According to a Freedom House report, foreign reporters during the 2012 Cup of Nations were harassed when attempted to cover issues outside of the games hosted in Equatorial Guinea. And the death of media freedom activist Manuel Nsongo is still a mystery. Here's a clip from the Christian Science Monitor that explains how unfree Equatorial Guinea is.
Equatorial Guinea is a small country off the west coast of Africa, but the former Spanish colony has garnered major attention since oil was discovered there in the 1990s. The U.S. is its second biggest export destination. It has also become well known amongst human rights groups which say the government is one of the world's most abusive and corrupt. Human Rights Watch's Arvind Ganesen.
Torture has been widespread, arbitrary detentions have been widespread, and in fact the government even resorted to kidnapping political opposition from abroad at times, or their family members, in order to make sure that there was no real challenge to the government's power.
Fabian Nsuingema is one of the country's few human rights lawyers. He has himself been imprisoned.
Catastrófica la situación, catastrófica. Se prefiere que uno mate antes de hablar de política.
Carmelo Mokong of the government's National Commission for Human Rights says they are making efforts to improve, including signing several conventions on human rights.
Et nous sommes obligés de respecter ça, mais ce que nous ne voulons pas accepter, c'est le dictat de certains États à dire que la Guinée équatoriale viole le droit de l'homme et l'autre c'est ça, parce qu'il n'y a pas de formule unique.
It's just sad, right? All right, so this next one, I really learned some things, y'all. Djibouti, the #4 worst country to be a journalist. It ranks number 167 out of 179 countries. The constitution in Djibouti is supposed to protect freedom of speech. However, it's not honored at all. Several reports out of Djibouti confirm this. Now, with no independent or private networks, the government basically controls all the information that flows throughout the country. Journalists and human rights activists are often arrested and detained, leaving little room for strong critical voices. According to a UN report on the media in Djibouti, quote, there is a chronic but silent emergency, right? That just sounds so eerie. A 2007 report by Reporters Without Borders said that the country, little by little, is closing itself off to the world. That's serious. And even overseas internet websites discussing the country are typically blocked. Now, unfortunately, guys, I could not find any English news reports on Djibouti, so I'm gonna just keep moving on, okay? Sudan is the third most unfree country for journalists. The country ranks 170, only 9 spots from the bottom. That's a shame. It's an area that can't get it together, it seems. So, as stated in the 2005 Constitution, media freedom is supposed to be protected. But the reality in Sudan is that the media faces extreme pushback and difficulties when reports don't satisfy the government of al-Bashir. Now, I'm talking about news agencies experience raids, offices are closed down, and large fines are imposed on journalists. The Committee to Protect Journalists reports that at least 27 journalists received some form of attacks or censorship in 2012. Now, I know what you're saying. A country like Sudan is still feeling the effects of war, which the region has been continuously facing since independence. Here's a clip now from the Euronews where police shot up a protest in Sudan. Like, what's the shooting for? They were totally peaceful and just singing. All right, let's move on. Somalia is second. It ranks 175 out of 179, pretty much at the bottom of the Press Freedom Index, and you already know the country is not free whatsoever. Islamic militant group Al-Shabaab still controls significant parts of the country. They are, though, being pushed back by African Union forces. But regardless, an anti-media campaign is still underway, with Al-Shabaab recently announcing the banning of internet usage through cell phones. For journalists now, it's rough. According to the CPJ, 12 journalists were killed. Over 12 journalists were killed in 2012 alone. Overall, 52 media professionals have been killed since 1992. The country has several media outlets, private and government-owned. But because of the attacks of al-Shabaab, the new government is still struggling to transition, and journalists walk a very thin and risky line in Somalia. Here's a clip explaining why Somalia is such a dangerous place to be a journalist.
In 2012, 18 journalists were murdered in Somalia, and to date, no one has been brought to justice for any of the crimes. Abdallah knew all of them. Many were colleagues or friends, and he understands the risks of his profession all too well.
Walking by foot and driving is always better driving, because driving, no one can surely identify you easily. So it is safe to drive instead of going round on foot.
Journalists are believed to be in more danger in Somalia today than at any time during the country's anarchic history. The media has opened up, and many of those killed were apparently targeted because of what they reported.
Journalists in Somalia are brave, brave. All right, let's move on. So can you guess what country is number one? It's an African country that is practically isolated from the international world. The government has absolute control over all media and information in the country. Laws don't even allow for any independent sources, although wealthy can get access to satellite TV. Journalists and political activists are repeatedly arrested and detained without charges, and sadly, it's common for many of them to just disappear. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, at least 28 journalists were in prison as of December 2012. Now, because of all of this, many journalists have fled this country. I'm talking about Eritrea. Check out this clip by Amnesty International exploring the notorious detention centers in Eritrea.
A lot of detention centres across Eritrea use underground cells and shipping containers to hold prisoners. So if you're arrested, you might end up in one of these. So in a container like this, there might be 20, 30 people, even more than that, and they'll be let out maybe once or twice in the day to use the toilet. A lot of detention centres in Eritrea are in desert locations and other locations that suffer extremes of temperature, very, very hot in the daytime, very cold at night, and the metal walls of the container will magnify the temperatures. So conditions are really appalling. One young man who escaped is Kidane, who was caught trying to flee the country to avoid indefinite conscription in national service. And after he fled the country, he told us his story.
We had to go out of hell to heaven. This is the comparison, this is the comparison. Eritrea is a hell place for us, and the place where we are expecting to go as a heaven, a safe place for us. You can take it up. Yeah, actually I was imprisoned here in Maedaga, and in this place it's very horrible. There is like 2 holes covered with a zinc cover. You got 2 breads a day, and then it's very crowded, lice all the time, very dirty.
This is real stuff, guys. All right, that was kind of depressing, right? I know. Now, all of these countries are lacking serious critical voices that could boost or even create democracies in some instances. Are you a media professional in one of these countries? I'd like to hear from you. Email me and tell me what's it like. What are you up against? So, guys, don't go away. There's much more coming up.